My family was a picture
I can't
postcard
do
of
this right
suburban
now.
success, the kind of image people put in frames and set on their mantelpieces to prove they'd made it. Our house wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A two-story colonial with pristine white siding and black shutters, a lawn so green and meticulously manicured it looked like a golfing green, and a flower garden my mother tended with the fierce dedication of a battlefield general. Inside, it was the same story of curated perfection. Everything had its place. The hardwood floors gleamed, the air always smelled faintly of lemon polish and whatever potpourri was in season, and there was never, ever a dish left in the sink overnight. My dad was the quiet engine of this perfection. He was a civil engineer, a man who built bridges and designed roadways, and he brought that same sense of order and structure home with him. He left for work every morning at 7 a.m., sharp in his sensible sedan, and returned every evening at 6 p.m. on the dot. He was the provider, the rock, the steady, unwavering presence in our lives. He wasn't a man of many words, but his love was in his actions, the way he coached my little league team, even when he was exhausted, the way he'd patiently help me with my calculus homework until I finally understood the formulas, the way his eyes would soften when he looked at my mom across the dinner table. He adored her. It was obvious in the small, unspoken gestures that made up the language of their marriage. My mother was the artist who painted the color onto the canvas of our lives. Where my dad was quiet and methodical, she was vibrant and effervescent. She was the president of the PTA, the head of the neighborhood watch, the woman who organized the annual charity bake sale with an efficiency that would put corporate CEOs to shame. She was beautiful, always perfectly put together, her laughter echoing through our perfect house. Our family dinners were sacred. Every night at 6:30, we'd sit at the big mahogany table in the dining room, no phones allowed, and we'd talk. My dad would ask about my day, my mom would share some amusing anecdote about one of the neighbors, and I would play my part as the dutiful, well-adjusted son. On the surface, we were flawless. We took vacations to national parks, we had barbecues in the summer with all the neighbors, we decorated for Christmas like we were competing for a magazine cover. I was a good student, a decent athlete, and I never got into trouble. I had friends, I had goals, I had a life that anyone would envy. But even in the brightest, most polished rooms, shadows can linger in the corners. I never had a reason to look for them. I believed in the postcard. I believed in the perfection. I believed my life was exactly what it appeared to be, stable, happy, and secure. It was a lie, of course, a beautiful, meticulously constructed lie, and I was the last one to find out. The foundation of our perfect world wasn't built on the bedrock of my father's stability, but on the fragile fault line of my mother's secrets, and the first tremor was about to hit. I just didn't know that the ground I was standing on was about to split wide open and swallow everything I'd ever believed to be true. It was a fortress of tranquility, and I was its prince, blissfully unaware that the queen was plotting a coup from within the castle walls. That illusion of perfection was my world, and it was so complete, so all-encompassing, that the idea of it being anything less than genuine never once crossed my mind. My memories are painted in these sun-drenched, idyllic hues. Summer afternoons spent in the backyard, my dad grilling burgers while my mom set out a checkered blanket with a pitcher of lemonade. The smell of chlorine from the community pool, the sound of her cheering for me at swim meets, her voice clear and distinct above all the others. Winter evenings by the fireplace, the three of us playing a board game, the air thick with the scent of pine from the Christmas tree and the comfortable silence of a family at ease with itself. These weren't just moments, they were the building blocks of my reality. My father's world revolved around her. He wasn't a demonstrative man in public, but at home, he was her loyal subject. He would come home from a long day of managing complex construction projects, and the first thing he would do is find her. A simple kiss on the cheek, a quiet, "How was your day, honey?" It was a ritual, a daily reaffirmation of his orbit around her son. I used to see it as romantic, the quiet devotion of a good man. Now, I see it for what it was, the unwavering faith of a man who had no idea his goddess had feet of clay. My mother, in turn, played her part to perfection. She managed our lives with an effortless grace that I now recognize as a performance. She was the quintessential supermom. Her car, a spotless SUV, was a command center for our family's logistics. She ferried me to and from school, to soccer practice, to friends' houses. Her calendar was a complex tapestry of appointments, volunteer meetings, and social engagements. She was the social hub of our neighborhood, the person everyone went to for advice or a cup of sugar. Her friendliness was her shield, her charm, her camouflage. No one would ever suspect that a woman so invested in her community, so dedicated to her family's image, could be living a double life. The cracks were there, of course, but they were hairline fractures, invisible to the unsuspecting eye. There were the book club meetings that seemed to happen more and more frequently, often on Friday nights. There were the long, whispered phone calls she'd take out on the patio, her back turned to the glass door, her voice a low murmur that I always assumed was just her gossiping with her friends. There was the new, sudden interest in her appearance. She started going to a gym in the next town over, claiming the classes were better. She bought new clothes, lingerie that seemed far too daring for my quiet, reserved father. I noticed these things, but I processed them through the filter of my perfect family narrative. Mom was just taking care of herself. Mom was just being social. It was all normal. I was a teenage boy. My world was supposed to revolve around school, sports, and girls my own age, not the subtle shifts in my mother's behavior. The lie was so comprehensive that it bred a kind of cognitive dissonance. Even when things didn't quite add up, my brain would smooth over the inconsistencies, preserving the pristine image I was raised to believe in. The perfect house, the perfect lawn, the perfect wife, the perfect son. It was a fragile ecosystem, and my mother was introducing a foreign predator, a secret that would eventually consume everything. I think, on some level, my father felt it too. I remember moments where he would watch her, a strange, unreadable expression on his face as she laughed a little too loudly at a joke on her phone or got ready to go out for another one of her girls' nights. It wasn't suspicion, not yet. It was more like a quiet confusion, the look of a man trying to read a map in a language he used to know fluently but now found strangely foreign. But he, like me, was a believer. He trusted her. He had built his entire life on the foundation of that trust. He had no contingency plan for this kind of betrayal, no blueprint for what to do when the main support column of your entire world begins to crumble from the inside out. He just kept working, kept providing, kept being the steady rock he'd always been, completely oblivious to the fact that she was slowly, methodically chipping away at his foundation with every secret text, every clandestine meeting, every whispered lie. The deception was an art form, and my mother was its Michelangelo. Her life was a masterpiece of misdirection. Looking back, I can see the scaffolding of her lies, the carefully placed drop cloths that concealed the truth. Her phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually attached to her hand or tucked away in her purse. It was password protected, which was new. When I asked her about it, she'd laughed it off. "Just keeping our private information safe, sweetie," she'd said, a breezy, dismissive answer that was designed to shut down any further questions. And it worked. Why would I question it? In our house, privacy was respected, and the idea of my mother having something to hide from us was as absurd as the idea of the sun rising in the west. Her schedule became more erratic, filled with new activities and commitments that seemed to spring up out of nowhere. A new yoga class on the other side of town, a volunteer committee for a charity I'd never heard of, impromptu lunch dates with friends whose names I didn't recognize. Each new addition to her calendar was a brick in the wall she was building between her secret life and our family life. My father, ever the trusting husband, encouraged it. "It's good for you to have your own interests, honey," he would say, oblivious that her primary interest was another man. The financial signs were there too, small leaks in the family budget that I only recognized in hindsight. There were more shopping bags from expensive boutiques, receipts hastily stuffed into the bottom of her purse, and a new credit card she claimed she got for the travel points. It was all explained away with plausible deniability. The new clothes were for an upcoming event. The credit card was a smart financial move. She was a master of creating narratives that were just believable enough to deflect suspicion. My father wasn't a man who scrutinized credit card statements. He trusted her to manage the household finances, just as he trusted her with his heart. The real genius of her deception, however, was how she used her role as the perfect mother to her advantage. She became even more attentive to me, almost suffocatingly so. She'd bake my favorite cookies, ask endlessly about my friends and my classes, and volunteer for every school function. It was a smokescreen. By amplifying her maternal devotion, she made herself seem unimpeachable. Who would ever suspect the doting mother, the woman who laminated her son's book reports and packed his lunch with a handwritten note every day, of being unfaithful? She was weaponizing her love for me, turning it into another layer of her disguise. It was a brilliant, sociopathic strategy. It kept me docile and unsuspecting, and it reinforced my father's belief that he was married to a saint. He would watch her fussing over me and see a devoted mother, not a woman riddled with guilt and overcompensating to hide her transgressions. I remember one evening in particular. She was heading out for her book club, dressed in a new silk blouse and smelling of expensive perfume. My dad watched her leave from the living room window, and I saw that quiet, confused look on his face again. "Your mom sure has a lot of energy these days," he said, more to himself than to me. "It's good," I replied, parroting the established family line. "She's happy." He just nodded slowly and turned back to the television, the moment passing without further comment. We were 2 sentries guarding a fortress, completely unaware that the enemy was not at the gates, but already inside, living among us, smiling at us, and slowly poisoning the well from which we all drank. The silence in our house wasn't peace. It was the eerie calm before a storm. Every one of her lies was a drop of rain, and the flood was coming. We were all about to drown in the truth she had tried so hard to conceal. The discovery wasn't a single, dramatic moment like in the movies. There was no walking in on them, no tearful confession. It was quieter, more insidious, a slow dawning of a horrific truth that seeped into my life like toxic mold. It started with a laptop. My own had crashed the night before a major history paper was due, and I was in a full-blown panic. My dad was already asleep, and I knew my mom was still up, probably reading in the living room. I found her on the couch, her own laptop open on her lap, a glass of wine on the end table beside her. "Mom, my computer's dead," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Can I please use yours to finish my paper? It's due tomorrow." She looked up, and for a split second, I saw a flash of something in her eyes. It wasn't annoyance. It was pure, unadulterated fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her usual warm smile. "Of course, sweetie. Let me just close a few things out." She clicked the mouse a few times, closed the lid, and handed it to me. "Just don't stay up too late," she said, kissing me on the forehead before heading upstairs. I took the laptop to the kitchen table, opened it, and got to work. Her email was still open in a background tab. I didn't mean to look. I've told myself that 1,000 times. I was just trying to close the extra tabs to keep the computer from running slow, but the subject line of the most recent email caught my eye. It wasn't from any of her friends. The sender's name was just M. The subject line read, "Tonight." My heart started to beat a little faster. "It's nothing," I told myself. "It's just a work thing, a PTA thing." But my curiosity was a gnawing, physical thing. Against my better judgment, my hand moved the cursor and clicked on the email. The message was short, but it was enough to shatter my entire world into a million pieces. "Can't stop thinking about tonight. You felt incredible. I'm counting the seconds until I can have you again. All my love, M." I read it once, then twice, then a third time. The words swam in front of my eyes, refusing to make sense. This had to be a mistake, a joke, a spam email that somehow looked incredibly personal, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The fear I'd seen in her eyes when I asked for the laptop suddenly made perfect, sickening sense. I scrolled down, my hand shaking. It was a chain of emails, dozens of them, going back months. I opened another, then another. They were filled with things I never should have seen, words that will be burned into my memory forever. Intimate details of their meetings, declarations of love, plans for a future that didn't include my father or me. They talked about us. They called my dad the warden and me the anchor. He was the obstacle keeping her from her true happiness, and I was the reason she couldn't leave. Each word was a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to smash the laptop against the wall. I wanted to run upstairs and scream at her, to demand an explanation for this betrayal that was so vast, so complete, it felt biblical. But I did nothing. I just sat there in the silent, pristine kitchen, the only light coming from the screen that was illuminating the destruction of my family. I closed the email tab, my movements stiff and robotic. I wrote my history paper. I typed about treaties and alliances and betrayals between nations, and all I could think about was the war that had just been declared in my own home, a war I didn't even know was being fought. When I finished, I closed the laptop, walked upstairs, and placed it back on the living room table. I went to my room, closed the door, and for the first time in my life, I understood the true meaning of silence. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the sound of a heart breaking. The next morning, I became an actor. It was the hardest role I've ever had to play. I went down to breakfast and there she was, humming to herself as she flipped pancakes, the picture of domestic bliss. "Morning, sweetie," she chirped, smiling at me. The same smile she'd given me my whole life. But now, it looked like a mask. All I could see were the emails, the lies, the man named M. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her who he was. I wanted to see if she would lie to my face. Instead, I just said, "Morning," and sat down at the table. My dad was there, reading the paper, oblivious. He smiled at me over the top of the business section. "Sleep well, son?" I just nodded, unable to speak, focusing all my energy on chewing the pancake in my mouth without choking on it. It tasted like ash. Every interaction that day, that week, became a performance. I had to pretend that I didn't know. I had to pretend that the ground beneath my feet hadn't turned to quicksand. I became a ghost in my own home, watching them, listening to every word, analyzing every gesture. The world I had known was gone, replaced by a dark, twisted version where nothing was real and no one could be trusted. I was no longer the prince in the fortress. I was a prisoner of war, trapped behind enemy lines, and the enemy was my own mother. The days following the discovery were a masterclass in psychological torment, all of it self-inflicted. I was living in a state of hyper-awareness, a spy in the territory of my own life. Every ring of her phone sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Every time she laughed at a text message, my stomach would clench. I started noticing things I'd been blind to before. The way she would angle her body away from us when she was texting, the faint, almost imperceptible hesitation in her voice when my dad would ask where she'd been. These were the tells of a liar, and now that I knew the truth, they were as obvious as a neon sign. I became an obsessive detective, piecing together the timeline of her affair from the fragments I had seen in those emails. Her new yoga class was on Tuesday and Thursday nights. The emails from M were always more frequent, more intense, on Wednesdays and Fridays. Her book club was a monthly meeting. The most passionate, breathless emails were dated the day after. It was a sickening, heartbreaking puzzle, and with every piece I put into place, my anger grew, solidifying into a cold, hard knot in my chest. My relationship with her changed overnight. I couldn't look at her without seeing the betrayal. I started avoiding her, making excuses to stay in my room or go to a friend's house. When we did have to interact, I was monosyllabic, my answers short and clipped. She noticed, of course. She was perceptive. "Is everything okay, sweetie?" She asked me one afternoon, her brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concern. "You've been so quiet lately." I stared at her, a dozen accusations on the tip of my tongue. I wanted to ask her if everything was okay with her. I wanted to ask her if she was happy, if her secret life was worth tearing our family apart, but the words wouldn't come. I was paralyzed by the potential fallout. What would happen if I confronted her? She would lie. I knew she would. She would turn it around on me, accuse me of snooping, of violating her privacy. She would create a storm of drama and chaos to deflect from the real issue, and my father would be caught in the crossfire. I couldn't do that to him. He was an innocent, a good man who deserved better than to find out about his wife's affair in a screaming match in the kitchen. So I just shrugged. "I'm fine, just stressed about exams." It was a weak lie, but it was enough. She accepted it, or at least pretended to, and the moment passed. But the distance between us grew into a chasm. I found myself gravitating towards my dad, a fierce, protective instinct rising in me. I started spending more time with him, asking about his work, helping him with projects around the house. It was my way of standing guard, of silently reassuring myself that at least one of my parents was real, solid, and dependable. He seemed to appreciate the extra attention, though he had no idea of the reason behind it. "It's good to have you around, son," he said one Saturday as we were fixing a leaky faucet under the sink. "I feel like I haven't seen much of you lately." The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. He was worried about seeing less of me, while his wife was living a whole other life he knew nothing about. My anger needed an outlet, but I had nowhere to put it. I couldn't talk to my friends. This wasn't the kind of secret you shared. It felt like a stain on my family, on me, so I channeled it into my schoolwork and sports. I stayed late at the library. I ran extra laps at track practice. I pushed myself until I was physically and mentally exhausted. It was the only way I could silence the screaming in my head. Sleep offered little escape. My dreams were haunted by faceless men and the words from those emails. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the sense of betrayal fresh and raw all over again. I was living on a knife's edge, balancing the weight of this catastrophic secret. It was changing me. The easygoing, happy kid I used to be was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful, and deeply angry young man. I was waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew that the fragile peace of our perfect house was a ceasefire, not a resolution. Sooner or later, the truth would have to come out. The only question was who was going to fire the first shot. The weight of the secret was a physical burden. It felt like I was walking around with a lead vest on. Each lie my mother told, another pound added to the load. I was constantly on edge, my nerves frayed to the point of breaking. The idyllic family dinners became exercises in torture. I would sit at the mahogany table, pushing food around my plate, listening to her talk about her day, about the PTA, about the neighbors, and every word felt like an insult. The sheer audacity of her performance was staggering. She could look my father in the eye, smile, and tell him she loved him, all the while carrying on a passionate affair with another man. It was sociopathic. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was it possible I had imagined the whole thing, that I'd misinterpreted the emails? I would lie in bed at night, going over the words in my head, searching for an alternate explanation, a loophole that would allow me to believe in her again. But there was no other explanation. The words were plain, the meaning undeniable. You felt incredible, counting the seconds, the warden, the anchor. These phrases became a mantra of my own private hell. I needed more proof. Not for me. I was already convinced. I needed something concrete, something undeniable that I could present to my father when the time came. I couldn't just tell him I'd seen some emails on her laptop. She would deny it, say I'd misunderstood, or worse, claim I'd fabricated it. I needed irrefutable evidence, so I continued my silent surveillance, but with a new purpose. I started paying attention to her phone habits. She had a habit of leaving it on the kitchen counter while she cooked. One evening, while she was distracted with something on the stove, I saw it light up with a text message. I was standing only a few feet away. I glanced down. It was from a contact named Mark. The message read, "Thinking of you. Can't wait for Tuesday." My blood ran cold. M was Mark. He had a name now. He was real. It wasn't just a faceless phantom in an email. He was a real person, a man with a name who was meeting my mother on Tuesdays. The next Tuesday, I feigned a stomachache to get out of soccer practice. I knew my dad worked late on Tuesdays, so she would be home alone for a few hours before he returned. I hid in my room, my door slightly ajar, and I waited. At around 6 p.m., I heard her on the phone downstairs, her voice low and conspiratorial. "He's not home yet," she whispered. "I have about an hour." A few minutes later, I heard the telltale sound of her SUV pulling out of the driveway. I waited 10 minutes to be sure she was gone. Then I went into her bedroom. I felt like a criminal, my heart pounding in my chest, but I pushed the guilt down. This was a necessary evil. I started searching. I didn't know what I was looking for. A note, a picture, a clue of any kind. I looked in her closet, in her dresser drawers, under the bed. Nothing. Then I saw it. Tucked away in the back of her jewelry box, hidden beneath a tangle of old necklaces, was a small velvet pouch. I opened it. Inside was a single silver locket, It was not something I had ever seen her wear. It was not a gift from my father. His taste was far more traditional. I opened the locket. On one side was a small, professionally taken photo of my mother, smiling. On the other side was a photo of a man I didn't recognize. He was handsome, I suppose, in a generic, salesman kind of way. He had dark hair, a confident smile, and he was looking at the camera with an expression of pure adoration. Underneath his picture, a tiny inscription was engraved. Always, M. I snapped the locket shut, my hands shaking with rage. This was it. This was the proof. This was the tangible evidence of her betrayal, a secret token from her other life. I took out my phone and took a picture of the locket, open, showing both photos and the inscription. I put the locket back exactly where I found it and left her room. My mission accomplished. I now had a name, a face, and a piece of damning evidence. The lead vest I had been wearing suddenly felt 100 pounds heavier. The question was no longer if I was going to tell my father. The question was when, and I knew it had to be soon. I couldn't let him continue to live this lie. I couldn't be a party to her deception a moment longer. The perfect family was a myth. The perfect house was a crime scene. And I had just collected Exhibit A. The decision of how to detonate a bomb is a heavy one. Do you give a warning? Do you try to minimize the collateral damage? Or do you just light the fuse and get to a safe distance? I wrestled with this for days. My first instinct was to confront her directly, to throw the picture of the locket in her face and watch her perfect facade crumble. But I knew that would be a mistake. It would be emotional, chaotic, and it would give her the opportunity to control the narrative, to twist the story, to paint me as the villain who violated her privacy. My father deserved to hear the truth from me, in a calm and controlled environment, supported by irrefutable proof. He deserved the dignity of not being blindsided in a screaming match. I chose a Sunday evening. My mother was at one of her book club meetings, a convenient and now sickeningly predictable excuse. My father and I were in the living room, watching a football game. The air was calm, the house was quiet. It was the perfect, peaceful setting for an act of emotional demolition. I took a deep breath, muted the television, and turned to him. "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. "We need to talk. It's about Mom." He turned to look at me, a flicker of concern in his eyes. He probably thought I was going to talk about a bad grade or a problem with a friend. "What's up, son? Is everything okay?" This was it, the point of no return. "No," I said, my voice low. "It's not, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I'm the one who has to tell you this." I took out my phone and pulled up the picture of the open locket. I didn't say a word. I just handed him the phone. He took it, a confused expression on his face. He stared at the screen, and I watched as the color drained from his face. He went pale, then a deathly gray. He zoomed in on the man's face, then on my mother's, then on the inscription. I saw his hand start to shake. He didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. The only sound in the room was the muffled roar of the crowd from the muted television. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were filled with a profound, bottomless pain that I will never forget. It wasn't anger. It was the look of a man whose entire world had just been invalidated. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "A few weeks," I said, my own voice breaking. "I saw some emails on her laptop by accident. I didn't want to believe it. I found the locket in her jewelry box today." He just nodded slowly, still staring at the phone as if he could unsee what he was seeing. He handed the phone back to me, his movements slow and heavy, like he was moving underwater. He stood up, walked over to the window, and stared out at the perfect manicured lawn. He stood there for a long time, his back to me, his shoulders slumped. I didn't know what to do, what to say. So I just sat there, my heart breaking for him, my anger at my mother solidifying into something cold and hard and permanent. Finally, he turned around. The pain was still in his eyes, but it was accompanied by something else now, a quiet, steely resolve. He was a man who built bridges, and he knew a compromised structure when he saw one. He knew that some things, once broken, could not be repaired. "Thank you for telling me, son," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. "You did the right thing. It took courage. He walked over, put a hand on my shoulder, and gave it a squeeze. It was the most contact we'd had in weeks, and it felt like he was anchoring me, keeping me from floating away in the wreckage. "She'll be home in an hour," he said, looking at the clock on the mantelpiece. "We'll talk to her together." I just nodded. The fuse was lit. The bomb was about to go off, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was facing it alone. We were a united front now, a father and son bound together by a devastating truth, waiting for the architect of our pain to walk through the door, waiting for the final terrible scene of the play she had written. The hour we waited for her to return was the longest of my life. My father and I didn't speak. We sat in the living room, the muted football game still flickering on the screen, a bizarrely normal backdrop for the impending implosion of our family. My father sat in his favorite armchair, his hands clasped in front of him, his face a stony mask of composure. But I could see the muscle twitching in his jaw, the way he stared at a fixed point on the wall, his mind a million miles away. I sat on the couch, my leg bouncing uncontrollably. I was a bundle of raw nerves, bracing for the confrontation. At precisely 9:30, we heard her SUV pull into the driveway. We heard the garage door close, the jingle of her keys, the click of the door from the garage to the kitchen. "I'm home," she called out, her voice bright and cheerful. It was the most grotesque sound I had ever heard. My dad stood up, his movements deliberate. "In the living room, honey," he called back, his voice devoid of any emotion. It was chilling. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway, a bright, fake smile plastered on her face. "What are you two doing sitting in the dark?" she asked, flicking on a lamp. "You look so serious." Her smile faltered as she took in the atmosphere in the room. She looked from my father's grim face to mine. "What's wrong?" she asked, a note of caution entering her voice. "Sit down, Caroline," my father said. It was the first time I'd heard him use her full name in years. He always called her honey or sweetheart. The formality of it hung in the air like a death sentence. She perched nervously on the edge of the sofa, clutching her purse in her lap like a shield. "You're scaring me," she said. "What is this?" My father didn't answer. He just looked at me. It was my cue. I took out my phone, pulled up the picture of the locket, and placed it on the coffee table in front of her. She glanced down at it. For a split second, her mask of confusion remained in place. Then, as she registered what she was looking at, her face collapsed. The color drained away, her eyes widened in horror, and her mouth fell slightly open. It was the look of a cornered animal. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. "That's not the question you should be asking, Caroline," my father said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The question is, who is he?" She stared at him, her mind clearly racing, searching for a lie, an escape route. I could see the desperate calculations in her eyes. It's an old thing," she stammered. "From before we were married. It doesn't mean anything." It was a pathetic, flimsy lie, and we all knew it. "Don't lie to me," my father said, his voice rising for the first time, laced with a pain so raw it was terrifying. "Not now, not after all this time. I deserve the truth." He took a step towards her. "Who is he?" She started to cry then, not the soft, gentle tears of sadness, but the ugly, gulping sobs of someone who has been caught. "His name is Mark," she said between sobs. "I'm so sorry. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" my father repeated, his voice incredulous. "A mistake is spilling coffee. A mistake is taking a wrong turn. This is a betrayal." "For how long?" She shook her head, burying her face in her hands. "I don't want to talk about this in front of him," she sobbed, gesturing towards me. "He has a right to be here," my father snapped. "He's the one who had to carry this secret. He's the one who had to find out his mother is a liar and a cheat. He's been protecting me from this while you were out with him." He turned to me. "She called me the warden, son, and she called you the anchor. That's what we are to her. Obstacles." The words hit her like a physical blow. She looked up at me, her face a mess of tears and makeup, an expression of pure desperation in her eyes. "Leo, I didn't mean it like that." "How did you mean it, Mom?" I asked, my voice cold and hard. How did you mean it when you were telling this guy you wished you could be with him, when you were calling Dad a prison guard? What part of that did I misunderstand? She had no answer. She just sat there, broken and exposed, the architect of her own destruction. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, was gone. In her place was a stranger, a weeping, desperate woman who had gambled with our family and lost. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by her pathetic sobs. The postcard was ripped to shreds. The perfect house was a hollow shell. The war was over, and we were all casualties. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a state of suspended animation. My mother fled upstairs to her bedroom, and the sound of her sobbing was the soundtrack to our shattered home for the rest of the night. My father and I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. He retreated into himself, a fortress of quiet, dignified pain. He made a bed for himself on the couch in the living room. It was a small act, but it was a declaration. A line had been drawn. The marital bed, the symbol of their union, was now a territory he would no longer occupy. The next morning, the house was suffocatingly quiet. I came downstairs to find my father in the kitchen, dressed for work, calmly making coffee as if it were any other Monday. But his eyes were red-rimmed, and the lines on his face seemed to have deepened overnight. He looked 10 years older. My mother was nowhere to be seen. "She's staying in the guest room," he said, without me having to ask. "I've asked her to make arrangements to leave." I just nodded, my heart aching for him. He was handling this with a strength and grace that I found astounding. He wasn't screaming or throwing things. He was methodical, practical, like an engineer assessing a catastrophic structural failure and calmly planning the demolition. He went to work that day. I don't know how he did it, how he managed to walk into his office and pretend that his life hadn't been blown to pieces just hours before. I went to school, and it felt like I was moving through a dream. I couldn't focus on anything. My teacher's words were a meaningless drone. My friend's laughter seemed to come from 1,000,000 miles away. All I could think about was my house, my parents, the gaping wound that had been torn in the fabric of our lives. When I got home, my mother's SUV was gone. A note was on the kitchen table, her elegant handwriting a stark contrast to the ugly words it contained. It was addressed to my father. I didn't read it, but I saw a suitcase packed and waiting by the front door. She came back later that evening to get it. I was in my room, but I heard her quiet entry. I heard her exchange a few hushed, tense words with my father. I didn't hear what they said. Then I heard the front door close and the sound of her car pulling away one last time. And then there was silence, a new kind of silence, not the tense, watchful silence of the weeks before, but the hollow, echoing silence of absence. The house felt huge, empty. Her presence, which had once filled every room, was now a void. Her perfume no longer lingered in the hallway. Her collection of decorative teacups on the kitchen shelf seemed sad and pointless. The perfection she had so carefully curated was now just a collection of meaningless objects in a house that was no longer a home. In the days that followed, my father and I began the slow, painful process of dismantling the life we had known. He contacted a lawyer. The word divorce was spoken out loud for the first time. It was a clinical, ugly word. He started sorting through their shared belongings, creating two piles, his and hers. It was a brutal archaeology of a 17-year marriage, each object a relic of a life that was now over. My mother, I learned through a series of strained logistical phone calls with my father, was staying with a friend. She tried to call me a few times, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. What could she possibly say that would make any difference? Her apologies were meaningless. Her tears, self-serving. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. Her perfect world had crumbled, and she had no one to blame but herself. The neighborhood, of course, noticed her absence. The rumor mill began to churn. My father handled it with quiet dignity. When a nosy neighbor asked where Caroline was, he simply said, "We're separated." He offered no further explanation. He didn't air our dirty laundry. He protected our family's privacy, even as it was dissolving. It was in these moments that I saw the true measure of my father's character. He was a man of integrity, a man who faced the deepest betrayal of his life not with rage, but with a sad, resolute strength. He was the rock I had always believed him to be. The fortress had fallen, the queen had been exiled, but the king, though wounded, was still standing, and I stood with him, his silent, loyal soldier, in the ruins of our former kingdom. Life settled into a new, fractured rhythm. My father and I were two ghosts haunting the halls of our own house. The pristine two-story colonial that was once a symbol of our family's success now felt like a mausoleum. Every room held memories, and every memory was now tainted. We fell into a routine born of necessity. We ate takeout on paper plates, the grand mahogany dining table collecting dust. We communicated in clipped, functional sentences, mostly about logistics. Did you take out the trash? I'll be home late from work. The easygoing chatter that once filled our home was gone, replaced by a heavy, unspoken grief. The hardest part was watching my father. He was trying so hard to be strong for me, but I could see the toll the betrayal had taken. He lost weight. Dark circles formed under his eyes. He would sit in his armchair for hours, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts he never shared. He was a man adrift, his anchor gone, his compass shattered. The divorce proceedings were a grim, methodical process. Lawyers were involved, papers were filed, assets were divided. My mother, it turned out, was not going to go quietly. When she realized that my father's quiet dignity was not going to translate into a generous settlement, she became vicious. She fought for everything. She wanted half the house, half of his retirement savings, spousal support. Her lawyer sent letters filled with accusations and demands. It was a stark transformation. The charming, beloved neighborhood figure was gone, replaced by a bitter, grasping woman I didn't recognize. My father's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davis, was unimpressed. Classic textbook, she told my father during one of their meetings, which I sat in on for support. She's lashing out because her fantasy life imploded. She feels entitled to compensation for her poor choices. Miss Davis advised my father to stand firm. The house was in his name from before the marriage. His retirement account was his own. Since they both had similar earning potential, my mother had a degree and had worked before I was born. Spousal support was unlikely. The evidence of her infidelity, while not legally relevant to the financial split in our state, certainly didn't help her case in the court of opinion. The locket, the emails, they painted a clear picture of a long-term, calculated affair. My mother tried to use me as a pawn. She would call, crying, telling me how much she missed me, how my father was being cruel and unreasonable. She tried to poison me against him. He's trying to leave me with nothing, Leo, she'd cry. After all the years I gave him, all the sacrifices I made. Her words were hollow. What sacrifices? The sacrifice of her fidelity? The sacrifice of our family's happiness? I refused to be drawn in. This is between you and Dad, I would say, my voice flat and detached. Leave me out of it. Each call left me feeling drained and disgusted. This was the woman who had called me her anchor, the reason she couldn't leave to be with her true love. Now that her true love had apparently not worked out as planned, I gathered from her bitter complaints that Mark was not stepping up to support her. She was trying to use me as a lifeboat. It was a pathetic, transparent ploy. The battle over their possessions was the ugliest part. She sent a list of items she wanted from the house. It wasn't just her clothes and personal effects. She wanted the dining room table. She wanted the leather sofa. She wanted half the art from the walls. It felt like she was trying to rip the memories from our home, to punish my father by taking the things he loved. My father, to his credit, was magnanimous. "It's just stuff, son," he said, looking at the list with a weary sigh. "Let her have it. I don't want to fight over a sofa." A moving truck came one Saturday. I stayed in my room, but I could hear the sounds of strangers in my house, packing up pieces of my childhood. When they were gone, the living room looked bare and scarred. The empty spaces on the walls were like wounds. That night, my dad and I ordered a pizza and ate it sitting on the floor in the empty living room. "We'll get a new sofa," he said, trying to smile. "Something you can actually put your feet on." It was the first time in a long time that I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could rebuild. Maybe we could furnish this empty house with new memories, memories that were real and honest and belonged only to us. Maybe the end of our perfect family wasn't just an end. Maybe, just maybe, it was a beginning. A year can feel like a lifetime. In the 12 months that followed the great implosion, my father and I slowly, painstakingly, rebuilt our lives from the rubble. The first, and most significant, step was selling the house. Neither of us could stand to be there anymore. It was a beautiful prison, each room a diorama of a life that was a lie. We sold it to a young family with 2 small kids, and watching them move in, full of hope and excitement, felt like a fitting end to that chapter. We found a smaller place, a townhouse closer to my father's work and my new college campus. It was modern, clean, and best of all, it was a blank slate. There were no ghosts in its hallways, no memories lurking in its corners. It was just ours. We furnished it together, picking out a comfortable, oversized sofa that was perfect for watching football, a simple wooden dining table where we actually ate, and art for the walls that we both liked. The process was more than just decorating, it was a reclamation. We were building a home that was a true reflection of us, not a curated stage for a performance. Our relationship transformed. The heavy, grief-stricken silence that had defined the months after she left was gradually replaced by a new kind of communication. We talked, really talked, not just about logistics but about how we were feeling, about the future, about the past. He told me about the early days of his marriage, about the man he was when he fell in love with her, and about his own quiet confusion in the years leading up to the end. He admitted that he had buried himself in his work, that he had perhaps taken her for granted, not in a way that excused her actions, but in a way that acknowledged the complexities of a long-term relationship. I, in turn, told him about the burden of keeping her secret, about the anger and confusion I had felt. It was cathartic, healing. The wall of his stoicism and my teenage reticence crumbled, and we found each other on the other side, not just as father and son, but as 2 friends who had survived a war together. I saw my mother occasionally. After the divorce was finalized, she moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. The few times I saw her, she seemed diminished. The vibrant, confident woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone who looked tired and perpetually anxious. The charm that had once seemed so effortless now appeared forced and brittle. Our conversations were awkward, stilted affairs. She would try to bridge the chasm between us with small talk, but it was useless. Too much had been broken. She would always, eventually, bring up the past, trying to relitigate it, to explain, to justify. "I was just so unhappy, Leo," she said to me once over a strained coffee. Mark made me feel alive. I just looked at her, no longer with anger, but with a kind of sad pity. "And what about us, Mom?" I asked quietly. "Did we make you feel dead?" She had no answer for that. She never did. I realized then that my mother's world revolved entirely around her own feelings, her own needs. She was incapable of truly seeing the pain she had inflicted on others. She was the star of her own tragic drama, and everyone else was just a supporting character. The vindication I thought I wanted never came in the form of a dramatic downfall for her. Her life wasn't a complete disaster. It was just small, empty. She had traded our beautiful, albeit fake, life for a fantasy, and when the fantasy dissolved, she was left with nothing but a cramped apartment and a handful of regrets. My vindication came from a different place. It came from watching my father laugh again, a real, unburdened laugh. It came from the easy silence in our new home, a silence born of peace, not tension. It came from the A on my first college calculus exam, a subject he had so patiently taught me. It came from realizing that the end of my family wasn't the end of my world. In fact, it was the beginning of a more honest one. The postcard was gone, but in its place, we had something real. It was a little messy, a little scarred, but it was strong, and it was ours. We had survived, and in the quiet peace of our new life, that felt like the greatest victory of all.